Okay.
Good evening. We are here this evening to have a work session concerning the African burial ground, and I would like to have us all introduce ourselves, but I would like to acknowledge Chairman John Hines of the City Council Hines, who's been chairing this committee. And I think it would be a good idea if we went around and introduced ourselves and as to maybe what committee we're here, or what committee you're on as you sit here on this board. My name is Joanne Grass. I'm Assistant Mayor. Mayor Sorrell's not well this evening, so I will be presiding over the meeting. And we'll go down this way.
Christopher Leclerc, Fire Chief.
I'm sorry.
Right. John Bohanko, City Manager.
Mary Bailey, a member of the Burial Committee.
I'm Bernice Jackson, and I'm representing the Seacoast African American Cultural Center on the Burial Ground Committee.
Ralph DiBonato, I'm Deputy Chair of the Traffic and Safety Committee.
Richard Bover, State Archaeologist. State Archaeologist, and working with the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Suzanne Woodland, Assistant City Attorney.
Steve Parkinson, Public Works Director.
Ron Seifert, Traffic and Safety.
Ted Gray, Traffic and Safety.
Harold Whitehouse, City Council.
Ned Reynolds, City Council.
I'm John Hines, City Council, and I'd like to, and also Chairman of this committee, and I would like to introduce the members who are not here. Valerie Cunningham is also a member, and Jack McGee has just arrived, and Jim Splain has called in with the flu, so he will not be available.
I'm Laura Panalaka, City Council, and a member of the Burial Committee.
Bill St. Laurent, City Council, and on the Joint Budget Committee.
Tom Perini, City Council. On a lot of committees, but not important for this.
And I'd like to mention that Councilor Marchand is not well this evening and isn't here. I think we'll go to Suzanne Woodward, Assistant City Attorney.
Well, as you know, we are here. As you know, we are here today because of the discovery in October of 2003 of unmarked graves. They were unearthed during a public works project near the intersection of Chestnut Street and Court Street. Upon the discovery, both the state archaeologist, Mr. Bover, who is here tonight, and Kathy Wheeler, who is the archaeologist retained by the city for the Court Street project, came on board to assist us with this discovery. Testing of the remains determined that they were remains of persons of African descent. In August of 2004, the City Council appointed a Blue Ribbon Committee to make a recommendation for the burial site that would do justice to those who are buried there. And as Councilor Hines indicated a few minutes ago, we have a number of members of our committee here who have worked diligently over the course of 6 meetings, beginning in September of 2004, to take a look at the area of Chestnut Street and to come back to the City Council with its recommendation for the area. The committee early on put together an abutters list and has tried very hard to get the input of those most affected by this discovery, namely the Chestnut Street area residents. They have been diligent in attending many of the committee meetings and participating in what you will see later on in terms of a proposal. Also participating in the meetings was the state archaeologist. He is basically the decision maker with regard to reinterment under state law. He has already held, quite some time ago, I think, a public meeting to solicit public input with regard to the reinterment, and the consensus of those who participated in that early public meeting was that reinterment would preferably take place at or near the site where the remains were first discovered. The critical issue really is, where are we going to reinter and how do we make the space for that? And over the course of several committee meetings, it became clear that what we really needed to do is to try and identify some space along Chestnut Street for this reinterment to take place, to memorialize, if you will, this discovery. At several meetings, we looked at various options, and Steve Parkinson will go through them in just a few minutes to show you the committee's evolution of this process. The committee has not made any recommendations at this juncture with regard to a specific memorial or plaque. We've taken some information on memorials. We know what other, like New York City has done with one of their sites. We've looked at a few things. But as a practical matter, we needed to start with the landscape, if you will, that we were going to work in. And that's why we put together a recommendation to bring to the City Council for you to look at that piece first. At this point, no engineering study has been done. Costs have not been estimated, nor has any other board or committee yet weighed in on this proposal that Steve will now walk you through.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to jump back in time a little bit just to bring the council and the Traffic Safety Committee and other members present as to what this area was back in the 1800s. This is what is presently Court Street, State Street here, Pleasant Street on the bottom, Porter Street, and this area right up here is the area of Chestnut Street.
Steve, can you back up just a little bit so we...
Sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. You can notate that back in this period of time, there was an area right here denoted as a Negro burying ground. On later maps, there was a fire station at the end of the street, right up here, and there was a plot of land running along the southern part of Chestnut Street that was city-owned land separate from the street itself. At some point in history, the street was widened, the fire station was taken down, and we have the current Chestnut Street. As Suzanne said, in the fall of 2003, we uncovered some remains. And it was down at the intersection. This is Court Street here and Chestnut Street, right in this area here. And you also notice right through this area here, it's kind of hash marked, and that kind of coincides with the older maps which denoted some kind of burying ground in that area. We obviously found 13 sets of remains in that area where we were going to be placing a manhole right in this area here to attach into the old sewer line that runs right through here. Of the 13 remains, 8 were removed because they were disturbed. 5 were left in place as is because they were not being disturbed. In 2004, as Suzanne said, the committee was established, and one of the first requests they had were to look at various scenarios of what could be done with the street to create a memorial to those that we know are buried there and those that may be buried there. We do not know the extent of it. So one of the first proposals we looked at was taking Chestnut Street, which is right here, and turning it into a one-way street from State Street here to Court Street, creating 3 green areas here, retaining some parking. This is the existing sidewalk here, so this grass area is basically where the parking occurs today. That was one scenario. Second scenario we looked at was dead-ending Chestnut Street here at Court Street, creating 1 green area, maintaining 2-way traffic on the remainder of the street, and maintaining parking. Important to note, this is the existing sidewalk, existing parking here, and creating this 1 green area. It was felt that having cars parked or driving over areas where potentially there are burials was not a good idea. So we went back to the drawing board again, and this time came up with dead-ending the street at Court, leaving this as 2-way but somewhat narrow, 2 10-foot lanes versus normally we like 11 or 12 when you have, but this is a very short dead-end street, not a lot of traffic, creating three fairly significant green areas along this area here, which basically encompasses the current parking stalls as well as the travel lane on the southern part of the street, putting everything more to the north side. In this particular rendition, we kind of tightened up the entrance to the bank. And in review with the bank, it was problematic for them. So we adjusted it a little bit and went back to their original opening right here, keeping the same three major green areas along the southern part, dead ending at Court Street, continuing the brick sidewalk across there, maintaining two-way traffic and access to these various driveways. And that was the final drawing that was approved by the committee to be sent on to the council. To give you a little idea of what this looks like, this is the existing street looking from Court Street up Chestnut Street, and we did a little rough rendition creating sidewalk across the end of the street, maintaining brick sidewalks up both sides, and creating these green spaces for possible use with some kind of memorial or dedicated areas for a memorial. To give you an idea from the other end of the street, looking down from State Street, the same direction, there again, creating the green spaces down the street, dead ending on the end, brickwork on both ends and on the sides, maintaining a travel way here that's sufficient for the amount of use that the area would get. This would give us three areas in which to go forward and put some kind of memorial plantings, something low. As Suzanne said, we have not done any engineering on this at this point. We need to look at what will we do with the drainage and get that to the drainage systems that exist, and not have to dig in the street any further than has been done. That ends those.
Thank you. We'll open it up for questions from the council or from anyone around the table.
John?
Ralph?
Yes. The extensions of the driveways would be just that. They, even though they're on public land, they would be dedicated to the access to those properties?
Correct. They would be like any other driveway across city property.
Oh, okay. The owner of that property could, in fact, park on them in between the green spaces? They wouldn't be compelled to drive all the way into their property? It's a question.
I guess I would expect them to be fully off of our right-of-way area in their driveway.
Okay, it's something I thought might become an issue. I mean, overflow parking when they have visitors that can't fit in their own driveway, something to consider.
Mr. Hancock?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think a couple things before we get into more discussion is just to understand really the process that would take place after this work session, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. Assumably, this will come back to the City Council for a vote to refer it someplace, and typically it would be referred to probably both the Traffic and Safety Committee and the Planning Board concurrently. In addition to that, as it goes through those steps, either the Planning Board or the Traffic and Safety Committee would probably have a public hearing on it, or both. After it goes through these particular city boards or commissions, what would then have to happen is we'd have to come back to the City Council with certain recommendations from Traffic and Safety, from Planning Board. After it comes back and the City Council views those options, it will vote on one. And if one of the options hypothetically includes closing the street, then the next step would be then to include it in the capital plan for a future year. So really, this is the beginning of the process. I think Ralph represents the Traffic and Safety Committee, and not to discourage questions, but I think for the people that are watching at home and for others to understand that this will have a full public airing at various stages as it goes through the commissions. one last thought. I think the state archaeologist should probably talk about the state statute briefly, because he controls a lot of what happens with the reinterment of the remains. And I know there's certain statutes he needs to abide by. But, Your Honor, maybe we would let him say a couple words?
Why don't you tell us your part in this, and maybe that will engender some further discussion.
Thank you. My role has to do with the discovery of human burials. And under the state statutes, when they're discovered and they're unmarked, there's a particular process. Basically, the remains are recovered if it's necessary. In this case, it was because the sewer was coming through. There is a requirement to identify who these people are, and if there are any next of kin that can be identified. We are in the process of doing that. Had some partial completion on that. It's been very slow, as you can imagine. The archaeologists have done their excavations, and they're analyzing the artifacts, the coffins themselves, the few things that were in the coffins, basically the nails, bits of glass. And they're preparing their analysis on that. And that is pointing towards an early date, which would coincide with the African burial ground. The human remains themselves needed to be identified. They were turned over to an expert in that area, Dr. Marcella Sorg. She works at the University of Maine, basically handles all of this kind of work for the state of New Hampshire. She's the nearest best expert. She was able to look at the remains, get an idea of the age at death, the gender of the people, some issues about health and so forth, to give us some parameters to see if we can identify who they were. And there were indications from looking at the bones themselves that these were indeed Africans. And some of them appeared to have actually been born in Africa and came to Portsmouth later in life. Also clear indications that some of them were slaves. There was, for instance, indications of infections on the shins of one individual, which would be consistent with being in shackles. So we were getting confirmation that this was indeed the African burial ground. Another aspect was to see if we could use DNA analysis to further refine our understanding as to who these people were in terms of what group or what part of Africa that they came from. I was frankly surprised to learn that it is possible to get down to not only parts of West Africa, but tribal origin using DNA analysis. Dr. Bruce Jackson, who runs the co-director of the Roots program, does this work and has been following up on it. As you can understand, it's very methodical and tedious work. I'd like to point out that he's been doing this at no cost to the city. He's volunteered this. So we were trying to identify these individuals. There were a few people who came forward that said that according to their own family histories, they had ancestors that would have been buried in that cemetery. DNA was donated by those individuals for comparison purposes. And I learned this week by email from Dr. Jackson that they have been unable to get any matches between the living people and the people in the cemetery, which, when you get down to it, is not terribly surprising. He was not particularly optimistic that that could be done. It could very well be that their ancestors are in that cemetery. It just so happens they were not among the 8 sets of human remains that were exhumed. So we have that portion completed. Everything still needs to be brought together into a final report, which is part of the requirements under state statutes, and that is proceeding. Probably the most lengthy portion will be the completion of the DNA analysis, trying to narrow down what part of Africa, and potentially even what tribal groups are represented, with Mandingo, Yoruba, Igbo, whatever. So that's underway, and it's not happening very fast, but as I said, this is very complicated work. So that then comes down to what will happen to the remains. And I held the public hearing here It's not required under the statutes, but this is, for me, a unique situation. I'd never dealt with this kind of cemetery situation before, and I really felt the need to get input from the public on this. As Suzanne stated, it was the unanimous consensus from those who attended the meeting and submitted written comments later that they should be reburied where they came from, in the cemetery where they came from. And so that's been the operating pose ever since. So from there, it's a matter of determining the details of reinterring the individuals after we've completed all the necessary hands-on analyses. And part of the issue is how much space will we need? How many coffins would be used? What size will coffins be? We have 8 sets of human remains that we need to deal with. And as you can understand, it could take up, a fair amount of space. But the coffins will not be the standard 6-foot variety. We're anticipating a smaller coffins, just simply because so many of the bones were missing because they had been completely eroded away. So it comes down to where are we going to bury them. And the Blue Ribbon Committee addressed that issue, taking into account the hearing that I had and additional information, and came down to it would be most appropriate to maintain that cemetery there and put the remains back, not exactly where they came from, because in some cases the sewer line is there. And we've actually been able to determine there's enough space within the area that has been completely excavated in one way or another, either by construction activities or by the archaeologists themselves, that we have an area where if you go in to dig again, you're not going to discover more burials. And we're all agreed that we really don't want to discover any more burials. And nor do we want to disturb the ones we know that are there. So there's an area which can be used. It's in part of the area that's identified on the dead-ended part of the street. That would be the most appropriate most appropriate place to rebury from a standpoint of not disturbing any additional graves. So that's what I hope we're working towards. There's obviously a lot of details, timing, and so forth, but that is where it goes. The decision is left up to me as to where the bodies are reburied, and I am taking strong guidance from the community as to where it should happen and following that. And as I stated in one of the Blue Ribbon committees, I don't feel it's appropriate to have bodies go back where people are going to be driving or parking. We don't do that in any other cemetery in town. Why should we do it here? So that's part of the reasoning as well. And I guess in terms of questions, has the committee or the city council given any consideration to restricting parking currently? There are 2 or 3 parking places that are over-identified graves, and I don't know if anyone's given any consideration to striping it for no parking or whatever. I don't know all the ramifications. I'm sure that there's traffic questions and so forth. But in the interim, because it wouldn't surprise me if it takes several months more or even longer. Has anyone given any consideration to restricting parking in the interim?
At this time, we haven't. But one of the things would be that there would be a issue that would have to come before the city council for any ordinance change or the parking committee. I think one of the things that we probably want to do is take a look at your concern, but also the practical matter of being able to enforce it. And until you start changing configuration of the road and creating that green space, it's sometimes you might have it as a no parking area. But unless you put blocks out there and do something like that, and right now with it a 2-way traffic situation, it might be confusing the people. So certainly we need to look at that. But secondly, I think the permanent solution will have to be addressed by the city council. And once they make that determination, then however they choose to proceed with it, there's going to have to be appropriate funding set aside to put in one of the options, which is going to include new green space, the brick sidewalks and the reconfiguration of that road. But I think it's something we can take a look at.
And to be quite honest, that specific issue is not something that comes under my purview as a state archaeologist for the graves that are already in the ground. I deal with things that are discovered and so forth. And it does is part of my decision as to where we're going to put the ones that are currently out back. And we've agreed that we shouldn't be parking on the ones we put back. And it just occurs to me that we might ask the question about the ones that are still there. It's not, that part is not under my responsibility, but it's a question that's come to mind.
Okay. Thank you. We have questions over here, Bill.
Yeah, I did. I asked about it.
I asked before John spoke.
I did too. I did too.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, the green space, does that have to be so large? I don't know, who am I talking to here with this stuff? The green space, it extends out quite a ways. Is that absolutely necessary? I mean, is there a question that there might be graves along that? Is that why that green space was in? I'm looking at the people who live in there, having to drive that long driveway into there. Who's going to clean out the snow out of there for them to get in the driveway and so on and so on? Looking futuristically. That's one of my questions.
Well, I think the green areas, as we propose, cover the areas that we suspect there are additional burials,
right,
which is the travel lane and the parking lane on the southern part of that street. So it was the committee's feeling that we wanted to protect those that we know are there and those that pretty sure that probably there are others that go up the street.
And the other thing was, I'm glad to see that you have one of the scenarios is to open this, have a narrow opening, a one-way street. Is that still one of the scenarios?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing that bothers me most of all is the fact that I'm surprised that another scenario is to remove the caskets of the bodies and put them in an appropriate, in an area that would be more appropriate as a memorial. I have a problem with, I guess if it were my ancestors, if I thought they might be my ancestors, I wouldn't care for that busyness of traffic around there, and someday that house in the corner may burn down and they may want to build something there, and there's a lot of construction going on there. I just would have thought that I would like to have seen one of the scenarios to remove as many of them and put them in a respectful place where they can be viewed or memorialized or whatever, all in I think we have a city cemetery or something, a section that we may have an area that we could designate for this. And if bodies come up in a future construction, we could put them there, leave space for this to happen. I just find that disrespectful to leave them there, because when they were buried there, it was obviously a quiet area, and now it's an extremely busy area, and I just wouldn't want my ancestors left there. I'd want them removed and put in a respectful place.
Bill, I'll let the state archaeologist reply, because he is the person in charge of reinterment.
Right.
Okay, first a quick question. Are you suggesting that the additional burials that are still in the ground be taken out and moved?
I'm not sorry.
Are you suggesting that...
You don't know there's any addition.
Oh, we have 5 in the ground still.
No, I know, yes, all
right.
of them.
And there's every indication, based upon our experience in other cemeteries and other cities up and down the eastern seaboard, there was... Our back of the napkin estimate is that there probably would have been a few hundred burials in there.
Right.
It's inconceivable to me that there are not many more in the ground there. Now, one never knows until one digs.
Right.
But it is there. There's enough documentary evidence from the maps and from the archaeological investigations and so forth that that is a cemetery. And so it needs to be properly protected. And while it may have been a quiet area 300 years ago, it certainly has been built over since then. And you have to deal with what's in the ground as well. In terms of putting them in another place, I was specifically concerned about that. And, sitting here as an archaeologist, not a member of the Portsmouth community, not a member of the African American community, I really felt I needed to get feedback from them. And I guess I would defer to the Portsmouth community, the African American community of the Seacoast, as to whether or not they feel it is more respectful to move them away or to leave them there. Everything I've heard so far says that they feel it's more respectful, but rather than speak for them, I think that it's better that they respond to your question.
Laura?
Yeah. First off, I didn't realize that the committee was coming back with 3 different scenarios. We presented this last one as what we chose and voted on when we were in committee. That's what the council sent us out to do, and that's what we did. We chose the closing of the streets. We went through talked with all the neighbors and everything about having their driveways and everything being all right. And this is what we chose. We wanted to be sure that the cemetery was not used for parking cars on top of it or running over it any more than it had to be until we got it changed. And I just hope that when this is sent to the council, that the council will understand, and I think they'll agree with me, that we chose this one with a closed Chestnut Street one way. And we got the bank was agreeable to that. They felt that, they could work with that. And all of a sudden, we're coming up with 3 scenarios to send to 2 committees that will, get everything off the bat. But we wanted a place where it would be quiet for the people that's buried there. We didn't mind paving over them years ago, but now that we found them there, that we should do something to memorialize them and put a memorial there. So I hope that that's what we come up with.
City manager would like to reply.
Just to speak to that issue, this is more historically to show what occurred during your process, okay? That's what Steve was presenting. He was showing how it evolved to the final recommendation by the Blue Ribbon Committee. Not to suggest that we are reopening it for 3 options. The idea, though, is people need to know what work went into getting to this point, because I think that's important so that the Traffic and Safety Committee or others don't retread that ground. So if you just showed the closure, I'm sure the first question out of Traffic and Safety would be, geez, did you look at a one-way street as opposed to closing? That's why Steve showed the historical evolution of how you ended up at a closure. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
I misunderstood you. I apologize.
Harold?
I probably never missed a day down there in October 2003 of seeing what was taking place. In all my days here, I probably never will witness such an historical find in all my life. Very, very interesting. But I'd like to follow up what Councilor St. Laurent is talking about, and that is the 8 remains that were excavated out of that grave site. Did the committee give any consideration of relocating these to either the Union Cemetery, the North Cemetery, or the Point of Graves, or Proprietor Cemetery and South Cemetery, which is a historical site? I'd just like to have the archaeologists answer that.
If I may, Councilor Hines would like to speak, and I think as chairman, I'll let him answer that.
Yeah, I think that the committee's feeling was that we have disturbed a grave site. We want to reinter those bodies in the same site that they were buried in originally. In doing justice to the site, when it was discovered, we felt that would be the proper thing to do. At this time, I'd like to introduce the last member of the committee, Valerie Cunningham, who arrived a little late for introductions, and perhaps you would like to address that question.
Well, I would only to say that we did give that consideration, and in light of the fact that we don't have the identity of those people who were buried there or those who remain there, we don't know what their relationships to each other were. We do know that in one case there were 2 sets of remains in one coffin, and we don't exactly know what that meant either. Perhaps they were related. Since we don't know the relationships of the people buried in that place, we feel that they should be kept together.
One more question. So, Valerie, if you do put the 8 remains back into the original Negro burial site, will there be a marker to identify the unidentified ones?
We have not yet discussed how we're going to memorialize this site. Since we don't have the identities of, their names, of course we're not going to have a memorial with their names on it. But we do know that these people were of African ancestry, that they were buried there together as a group, and they will be memorialized in some way, in some appropriate way.
Just one more.
And we also, I think that the fact that they were buried there, regardless of what their ancestry was, this is a cemetery. It was a cemetery. The fact that it was paved over by the city and changed and a sewer line put through there, that is not their fault. This was their cemetery, and it was dishonored in later years, and now it's up to us to correct that.
It really was to see a sewer line go right through one of the coffins.
Right.
Ted?
Yeah.
Bernis?
I guess I got to play devil's advocate too. Apparently, where 8 remains have been exhumed.
Yeah, we have 8 individuals and 7 coffins.
5 others that we know are still buried there.
There are 5 other coffins there. There could be more than 5 people in
That's
there.
what I say, 5 known. I would think that by moving the cemetery, to give these people, whoever they were, a decent resting place, to remove it somewhere within the area, perhaps like a piece of property of the Governor Langdon property. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out. A marker is fine, but to have traffic going over that now known cemetery, I think these people deserve some place of decent rest. Moving it would help make up for the callousness, if you will, of a previous administration, whenever it was. Why it was done, who did it, who knows. But I think, in all decent due respect to these people, however many there are there, that the least we can do is give them a decent resting place in a decent area, whether it's in a current cemetery or if we could work out something with, let's say, the governor, with the SPNEA or something of that nature. I don't know.
Bernis?
I just wanted to say that I want us to be mindful of the fact that back in the summer, I think, or early fall, we had a public meeting, a public forum here, and the consensus of the public was that we reinter those people at the same place that they are now, because that is the cemetery.
I understand that. I certainly understand that. But I just think that where we know it's a cemetery, and just if some decent place, that today obviously isn't a decent place, but if here again, I know it's a cemetery. It was.
Thank you. Suzanne?
I just want to point out, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we don't actually know the boundaries, if you will, of this cemetery, and that's one of a significant problem when you talk about, let's consider removing, all of the remains there. We don't have, a way to delineate exactly where that space is. So you would run the risk, if you choose, going from one end of Chestnut Street to the other, of missing remains, in which case then you, if you will, split families. So that is just one difficulty that I sort of have seen in terms of the boundary issue. And I'd also note that one of the things that came up during the committee's consideration is that there was actually it's not quite unusual to find unmarked burial sites, and in New York City, in fact, an African burial site was discovered smack dab in New York City, and New York City residents chose to reinter at the site, create a memorial. It's something we haven't looked at in depth, but some of the committee members have discussed that. So bringing the remains back to the site and creating some sort of memorial is not something that's never been done before. It has been done before, and I think the committee has very carefully considered that.
John?
Thank you.
Jeff, wait a minute. I have a list here. John Hines.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
This meeting was to brief the city council and the public on what the committee appointed by the mayor to formulate a plan, take it to the council for approval or disapproval if in fact they didn't accept the plan that this committee worked on for several months. And the plan itself is in its first stage, and what we're asking Monday for the council to do is to approve the site. If we reach that stage with their approval, we will then move on to the dedication, the marking of the site, and whatever other questions might come up at that time. So discussions tonight should hinge on what this committee has presented and will present to the council Monday. And that's where we are.
Thank you. Jack?
Right. Just to respond to some of the comments which were made by Mr. Gray and Councilor St. Laurent and Councilor Whitehouse, and just to go follow up on some of the comments that have been made. Thank you. You're dealing at an issue that has various levels when you're talking about moving the cemetery. I would never say it is always inappropriate to move a cemetery, but in this particular case, I would strongly advise it not be considered, and as Valerie said, we considered it and set it aside. First of all, from an archaeological viewpoint, Dr. Barbier is having a heart attack over there. You don't move a cemetery. You can't move a cemetery because you're destroying it from an archaeological standpoint. And attempting to go in there and remove what remains are there would be utter destruction, and no archaeologist could ever agree to that, nor should they, based on their discipline. Second of all, you're dealing with this at an historical level, which Attorney Woodland alluded to. This cemetery is a valuable historic resource. This cemetery has the potential of being another point of interest to tourists and members of the city. Sure, it's in a crowded area. Point of Graves is in a crowded area. And moving a cemetery like this would be like moving Point of Graves because it's in a crowded area. We have the cemetery there. Not only do these people deserve to be left as undisturbed as possible, but they in this case, they should be left there for historic reasons. And by closing off this street, we accomplish something else. We point out in this case how the callousness of earlier years shouldn't happen as cavalierly as apparently it did. And from a practical standpoint, there are anecdotal stories for the last 150 years of bones coming up in that area all along Chestnut Street. And this area should stay where it is. It's a valuable asset to the city. The people who are there should remain there, and it serves as a reminder of how to honor the dead in this particular circumstance. So that's why it can't be done here. And sure, there are cases when you might want to move a small cemetery, but this is too valuable to move. It really would be a disservice to the city to move it, I think. My thoughts.
Thank you. Valerie?
Suzanne, answered my question.
Okay. And Tom?
Yes, if I may, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke earlier with Susan Woodland, and as it happens, my firm does some work, and I have done some work for Bank of New Hampshire. As I understand that the proposal that is presented this evening doesn't have any dissent with Bank of New Hampshire in terms of what's being offered, I don't feel there's a conflict, and I discussed that with the city attorney, and I feel that I can go forward with my comments. I would also point out that if at a later point that ceased to be true, then I would have to abstain. But presently, since I'm not voting on anything, and since everyone seems to be in accord with the proposal as offered as stakeholders, I'm going to talk. And the comment I have to offer is that if we appoint a blue ribbon committee, we do so for a reason, taking into consideration the matrix of skills, understanding the community, et cetera, that they would have, and this is certainly no exception, and so I think it's a good idea to listen to them. I also think that, and I would defer to the state archaeologist, but it's my understanding that there's a general presumption that one doesn't disturb graves. And
No, it's not a general presumption, it's a crime.
so one might add this additional reason if you're thinking about it. Even if we can't determine the nature and extent of the familial relationships between the individuals who are buried and the ones that we presume are there buried, they were also part of the same community, whether they were related or not, and that's another factor. That was their community and that was their cemetery. So I think the Blue Ribbon Committee's report is powerful, and I would be hesitant to be too expedient about moving bodies from graves.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I just hope that we're all on the same page as closing North Chestnut Street. I know it's not easy to close the street in Portsmouth. We have a lot of one-ways as it is now, but this has all been worked out with the committee and the people that live on the street and everything else, and I think we need to put this memorial in there and go forward the way the committee wanted it to be done. And I really do feel that it's an asset to the city, just like Jack and you does. So I hope when the other two committees get a hold of this that they keep it where it is. Thank you.
Ned?
Thank you, Assistant Mayor. This is obviously an issue, in a situation that requires great sensitivity and respect in in examining and in discussing options, and I have been involved in the process that's gone on, and I certainly back up what Councilor Farini said about the work of a Blue Ribbon Committee, and appreciate the work that was done, and place a lot of stock in their deliberations, and of course the fact that a public hearing was held, and the recommendations that are being made. And what it seems to me the recommendation is that we are essentially the city is moving to seems to be moving in the direction of recreating, re-establishing a place that once was and then was inappropriately disregarded, and now, and the feeling is it ought to become regarded as hallowed ground. I just have a little bit of discomfort with seeing only sort of the partial plan for doing that, and I just wonder, I forget who it was, I can just see some real practical sort of potential problems with that, where this space is created and then we might run into a situation where it isn't being managed, or what's actually happening on the site is not appropriate? I mean, somebody mentioned snow removal, like long driveways. And in the winter, is a plow going to come down and push a big snowbank at the end where it's fixed? And are people's snow blowers going to pile the banks up on the green space? So what is going to go there? And I think we ought to be very careful as we go to make sure that what we end up with is what everybody wanted, and not, get into a situation. Your Honor, if I might, to respond to Councilor Reynolds, this is conceptual in nature. The committee worked on a conceptual basis. I think it started with the state archaeologist saying, what does the community of interest want? And that is what the Blue Ribbon Committee basically looked at, first and foremost. I think we heard that tonight. Secondly, the Public Works Department developed schematics that show the general blocking off of the street and where the green area would be in general. When I spoke of getting it back to the Traffic and Safety and Planning Board has a capital improvement plan and deals with the capital improvement plan. The key item here is for the City Council to approve the closure of the street. They are the legal entity that can do that. So until once that happens, and if it does, then what we will do is we will work with Traffic and Safety to say, okay, now that this street is closed, we'll have to do a traffic modeling to see what happens with emergency vehicles. The fire chief is here tonight, and other things. And the Traffic and Safety Committee has a lot of expertise on it, practical and also technical, that we'll bring in. In addition, we'll bring the Planning Board in to talk about the capital needs of this. Once it's done, if you're going to do it right, you're going to have some money set aside to have the configuration so that you can deal with the abutters and making sure that their properties are continued to have access as they've always had it. So the first step really is to take the Blue Ribbon Committee's general consensus of what they want, which is basically, if I understand it, is to close Chestnut Street and to reinter the remains at that location, and develop a situation where you respect the reinterment and where you see where the green areas would be, and also to take into consideration those that have businesses in the area. So the first step is really for the council to take a vote on the issue, and then we will put into motion whatever that vote is. And if it is to close the street, the next thing we'll do is we'll go to Traffic and Safety and we'll talk to them about some of the impacts, and then we'll go to planning and say, okay, now we're going to have to put some money in for the 07 CIP, and then once we have that, then we'll go to work on designing it, like we do with any project.
Okay, thank you. Ralph?
Yes, I think it's important for us at this point to recognize, and we've had a good discussion, we can't take the remains of 7 people that have been exhumed, and we can't remove the remains of 5 that we know exist, put them somewhere else and pretend that it's not a cemetery. We're going to leave somebody behind, and we'd be doing exactly what was done 100 or 200 years ago. And to me, it's not acceptable. There's no way around that. The committee's put a great deal of work into it, and I think what John has said is very important. I think we're at a point of those of us who weren't part of the committee that have been invited here tonight because of our contribution through other committees need to accept that this committee's put a lot of work into this and let this move forward to the City Council to simply say, this is the preliminary. Does the City Council agree to go forward and work on it? And I'm at that point right now, not to cut anyone else's discussion off, but that's where I am. Thank you.
We also do not have that right to make that decision. It's the state archaeologist that tells us where reinterment can occur.
Right. Basically, I have to decide where they go, and I'm not going to put them under an active road.
Thank you. I have Bill down next. Would you?
Thank you. City manager answered pretty much my question, because I was going to direct it to the chief to see with closing off the street, would these people have a problem? But that's going to be answered at in another section, depending on how we vote. And I think this has been a good movement here to to tell the people who are from the traffic and safety and the fire department where our concerns are. So now when we pass that on to them, that they'll know where our concerns are. So I think this has been a very good meeting to find those questions, so that these other people will know what we're thinking of. So, but anyway, I'm not going to ask the chief now, because it's got to proceed unless the chief wants to answer. You know, if we say cut off the street, is that going to create any kind of a problem for people who live down in there if they have fires for you to get to?
Councilor, I was involved in the early discussions of this, and I had a few questions at the time. But again, I think we let it go through process. See what the city council wants to do, let it go to traffic and safety and planning, and see what concerns come out of that. But just to clarify, I think what the Blue Ribbon Committee's work is admirable. I do believe this is the first step of the process. This is a proposal. Planning board's supposed to look at it. Traffic and safety has to look at it. And I think it's like a draft. We'll have to come back and see what it looks like after that.
Thank you.
I have, John, did you have?
Yes, I would like to reiterate that this committee has worked very hard to make a presentation to the council on Monday night for the first stage of doing justice to the site that we found on Chestnut Street. We have the complete concurrence of the neighbors, the businesses, and the guidance of our Assistant City Attorney and Steve Parkinson for Public Works, thanks to our City Manager, who has managed to provide us with all the technical assistance we need. So when we come to the council Monday, it is not going to be a question of what it is that this committee has devised with the concerns of all those people in that area. We have done that. We have finished. We are now ready to come to find out whether that agreement can be a basis for moving on from there to do justice to those bodies that were found there, and to create a memorial that would allow the people in the city to look with pride upon their recognition of something that may or may not have happened 100 or 200 years ago. But now that we have discovered the issue, we're doing justice to it. And I think that says something for Portsmouth.
Ned.
Well, I want to reiterate what I said earlier at the beginning of my remarks about, handling the situation with the appropriate respect and sensitivity. And I guess just the only concern I have, which I articulated at the end, was that I just wonder, it still sort of seems to me like half a loaf in terms of we're doing something that moves toward creating, almost recreating a cemetery-like space, but it's still going to be a place that's it's not a through street. Now it's a dead-end street, but it's got 3 driveways, and there's still going to be cars traversing it and snow plows and things. So I mean, obviously the probably perfect ultimate solution would be to make that whole area a beautiful pedestrian mall memorial ground. But of course there's there's private property rights and driveways and things like that exist. So I guess if again, deferring to the work of the committee, if there's comfort that is the appropriate thing to do, I'm certainly going to support it. Just the concerns I express about the practical, management of that space in terms of snow clearing, and someone asked about, parking, whether the driveways are they the people's driveways or are they city property and parking is forbidden. I guess I'm just thinking those ought to be thought out and presented as part of the package a little bit more.
Harold?
Yes, a question either to Valerie or the archaeologist. In my observations of the excavation down there, it looked like the main portion of the cemetery was from the middle of Chestnut Street westerly and possibly continuing underneath the foundation of the house on the corner of Chestnut and Court. Is that true?
We were able, or actually Dr. Wheeler and her crew were able to identify the locations of those 12 coffins, 13 people. Some of them went under the sidewalk, and there's every indication that, yes, it probably did go into the lawns and so forth, but no one has specifically looked there who has the ability to recognize that there might be graves or not. I mean, certainly people have dug in there in the past, and it would not be a surprise to me that there were some graves disturbed at that point. But was the cemetery larger? Yes. Can we give you the exact boundaries? No. Can we present a defensible argument against a reasonable critic that it extends up the street? Yes. It's larger. I think maybe what we should do is not look at the situation as a cemetery causing a problem for the city, but the city has caused a problem for the cemetery. And we need to keep that in mind. The cemetery was there first. It's consecrated ground. It is a cemetery. The boundaries and specifics of it have been lost over time, as happens with so many other cemeteries, rural circumstances, urban, and so forth. But it is still there. And the question, you have several questions before you. The most immediate is what are we to do with the 8 remains that are out of the ground? Where are you going to put them? It makes sense to me, as an archaeologist, as a person, to put them back where they came from. And that part is still a cemetery in my mind because that was consecrated ground. Now, you can sort of debate the edges of it, but that is central. And I think that, working with the committee, they've given a lot of thought, considered virtually everything that you have brought up this evening, and having gone through that process, arrived at that solution right there, which may have a few problems with it, but we plow snow in modern cemeteries so people can get through in the wintertime. Now, putting a snowplow over a grave is a whole lot better than putting a sewer line through it.
My decision in this issue is going to be the early maps. Where did the boundary show the cemetery was located? If it's in the middle of Chestnut, going towards State, into the area of the Rockingham condos, then that's one thing. If it took up all of Chestnut Street, all the way from State down to Court, the width of the street, then that's another issue I've got to deal with.
You're hitting on an interesting situation, the debate between the historians and the archaeologists. And what is a line drawn on a map is an interpretation. The archaeologists put more faith in what they dig up from the ground. The maps that we have are approximations. If you look at those maps, the one that was showed earlier on, it is not exact. If you try to use it today for boundaries and streets and so forth, you will find errors within it, errors that you can identify yourself quite easily. No map has presented a good, clear definition of where that burial ground was. That gives us the knowledge that there is one there. As I said, the central part we know is the edges that we're having a problem with. And I think that we need to be cognizant of that and try to deal clearly with the center and make the best solution that we can for the edges. And frankly, I'm impressed that the African American community is comfortable with, permitting the access to those private homes, which might go over some of the graves, but the occasional passage of the residents over areas where there might be graves is a whole lot better than charging rent on top of the coffins when you buy a parking space.
Ted?
Yeah, I just want to sort of apologize. I didn't realize that the committee had gone this far. This is the first meeting that I've attended, and when I got the invitation, I sort of thought that this was maybe a preliminary planning. So I will defer to the committee.
Oh, thank you. Tom?
And I'd ask, thank you. I would ask John to correct me if I'm wrong, but procedurally so that we understand what will happen. In the event the City Council decides on Monday that it will approve this preliminary offering, the Blue Ribbon Committee, then it would go to the Planning Board and Traffic and Safety. Is that correct?
I think primarily if the city council approves this scenario, then what will happen is it'll go to traffic and safety more for, okay, what are the impacts that this closure has on other traffic flows in the city, and will we need to then correct other traffic flows in the city? Not to say that we can't close Chestnut Street, because I think from a public safety point of view, we've preliminarily figured that it can be done. It's just a matter of you now need to traffic model the rest of, it's like changing the flow of water. I mean, you need to know where it's going to come out the other end. And so if the council says they want that street closed and the state archaeologist wants the remains reinterred at that location along with the community of interest, then we'll do that. It's just a matter of now we've got to figure out what happens afterwards with other traffic issues. That's all.
I appreciate that. I can be more specific. What I'm trying to get out there for those watching and for those present is what are the stops along the way? In other words, the last public hearing, if the planning board hears this, for example, there's likely a public hearing.
The only reason I would think the planning board would see this is from a capital improvement standpoint.
If we close the street, then won't the city council need a public hearing to do that?
I would defer to the city attorney on that one.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check into that one. I can find out my ordinance.
But I think Monday night, if the council wants to put this on the agenda, I think the idea is to at least have an understanding, the staff has an understanding that it has majority view from the council that we want to move forward on this, so that, as Councilor Reynolds indicated, we'll do more definitive work. I mean, then we'll talk to the Traffic and Safety Committee and say, okay, let's do a traffic modeling with this close. Let's, because we'll bring in a traffic engineer and we'll talk about that. And okay, that's basically what we're looking for. If hypothetically the council said no, they weren't interested in doing this, then that changes our direction.
Laura?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we did discuss how far that cemetery ranged. We were told by some people it could go way down to Haymarket Square, where we just get over. We came to the decision after talking it over that we knew where this particular spot was, and we wanted to close that off and memorialize it like it should have been years ago. And we can't correct something. We can't tear down all them houses. And the people along that street were very cooperative. They came to all the meetings. They wanted to help us in every way they could. So the boundaries are quite big, but we just asked for a little spot.
Valerie?
I was going to address that too. We don't really know what the boundaries were. All we have to go by, which is what Steve showed you, was a 1705 map that was drawn by the white leaders of the community when they were dividing up the glebe land. The fact that they put Negro burial ground on there does not mean that they were creating it in 1705. I'm quite sure it means that this was the edge of town, this was no man's land, this is where the African people were burying their dead. And it was already the Negro burying ground, and that's why it appeared on that map. They were laying out streets on the map, however, so I don't know what those boundaries were. We've heard stories and read stories in the newspapers about bones being brought up as building and other public works projects were happening in that area from the 1800s on. So we don't know what the boundaries were. We do know what we've got on Chestnut Street.
Thank you, Valerie. Mrs. Kathy Wheeler, archaeologist.
Yes, Kathy Wheeler is the archaeologist that was on this site, and also just for council's information, others and those at home, the city of Portsmouth does retain an archaeologist now for all jobs. Even before this one, in the central business district because of a number of issues that the city encounters. So Kathy, you want to speak a little bit to the issue?
Thank you, Assistant Mayor. I wanted to make 2 points. One goes back to that very first image that Steve showed about the Negro burying ground. That script was, in fact, closer to one side than the other. The other map that Steve referred to, which he did not depict, is one that's dated 1853, and it shows pretty much as if you took that green area and made one continuous band along the one side, one of those lanes, that's what the city had designated as city land. It did not have a function specified, but between the two maps, the 1705 map and that 1853 map, in my mind, it's pretty clear that that whole, I guess you were calling it the south side? West side. I'm just calling it the west side myself. That whole west side is cemetery. That's the first point. Second point is we discovered 13 grave shafts in a small area. If I just took a simple arithmetic model, we could have as many as 200 graves out there from the Court Street end up the hill to State Street. I can tell you just very grossly that to recover those 8 graves cost about $10,000 each. So if you want to think about removing a cemetery and just in sheer dollar amounts, not even considering the sort of issue of hallowed ground, I think it might sway some of you to think that it might be the better idea to leave them back where they came from, put them back in the ground the same way. And I think the third point is that what I just touched on it, and culturally, when you develop a cemetery, it is a consecrated area. And I, in fact, was a little surprised because I was the one that was ankle deep in raw sewage when I had to take those remains out of the ground. In June 2004, when there was a consensus, and that means everybody in the room to a person stood up and said, we want them to rejoin the community from which they came. We want them to go back in the ground. And I came into that room feeling, well, no one in their right mind, excuse me, Valerie, will want to put people back in the line of sewage. But I was really humbled by the people that spoke that night, and I learned a lot that night because there was a very true sense that that is not a cemetery. That's a community. It's a community of ancestors. It's a community of people that were brought here from Africa. They slaved. They built your seaport. They helped to build a city. They were buried on the edge of town, and by no fault of their own, they just got forgotten. And I'm not going to assign blame because I think that happens in a lot of settings. The cities grow. And somehow by 1853, the city knew there was a strip of land there that kind of was something, but no one even knew by 1853 exactly what it was anymore. And then the city encroached more and more on that spot. So I think several speakers have addressed this. It's a sort of a chance for the city to back up and kind of rectify something that happened a long time ago.
Anyone else with questions or statements or discussions? Yes, sir.
Well, there is the possibility of up to 200 people buried there. And I think that it would be a shame to try to move this, or the 12 or 13 that there are, to move them somewhere else, when in fact they probably have relatives in that cemetery at another location. So I do believe that, as Jack McGee said, the city could use this as an asset for tourists to show that, the city in 2005 or 6 or 7 cares about what happened years ago and has tried to correct it.
Thank you.
I'm probably going to reiterate a few facts, but this committee's desire was to memorialize a site that, in fact, we knew there were burial grounds and African burial grounds at that site. Now, presumption, maps, and whatever might indicate that there were a great number more, and that may be a fact, but we only dealt with the fact as we could see the actual site where there were bodies, and that's the site we chose to memorialize, to set up a proper memorial to do justice to a site that had not been recognized before. So when we come to the council Monday night, we're only asking the council to approve a choice of that site and to move on from that time to do all the rest of what we will have to do to make it functional. But at any step between approving at least the foundation, a place to start working from, which is what we're asking for Monday night. After that, there'll be more public hearings, referrals to planning, back to the council, whatever. So this Monday night is first step.
Thank you, John. Any other questions or comments? The state archaeologist, is this something you'd like to, like to leave us with?
Nothing, well, I guess I would encourage you to accept the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Committee and to go forward as expeditiously as possible so we can have some resolution to the situation.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not,
Let's get out of here.
we're adjourned. We're adjourned.
Just from, just a piece of housekeeping matter for the city council, that work session relative to the police department, I'm going to have to schedule that for Thursday, April 21st, because the 27th didn't work for them because there's school vacation and all the people that were going to be making the presentation. The police department, remember, they wanted to have a presentation to you. So I was